Hey, how is everybody? This is Mr. Barrett's, I guess, birth story. I don't really know. It's just the labor and delivery part of him getting here. For those of you who don't know, we have struggled with infertility for 5 years. We've had 4 losses, 1 tubal, and 3 miscarriages. And we did IVF this past February. And we got pregnant with a baby boy, and then he made his entrance into the world this past Tuesday, November 27th at 4:22 in the morning. And I guess this is kind of his little story. So we'll pick up on Sunday, where all the action is supposed to get started. We had an induction scheduled for several reasons. First and foremost, he was an IVF baby. And my doctor was not comfortable with an IVF baby going over 40 weeks due to complications that can happen because it is an IVF baby. If you've ever gone through IVF, you know that you sit in that doctor's office and they tell you all of the complications and everything that can go wrong with your child just because it is an IVF baby. He had a higher risk of being born still if we went past 40 weeks or tried to have him naturally. The other reason was because we lived an hour and a half from, or an hour and 10 minutes roughly, depending on traffic and weather, but from the hospital. We had to drive down there. It's November. We live in Idaho, and there is snow on the ground. So weather was a concern about getting there and being able to get there safely. If I did go into labor on my own, that was a concern. And so the final one was my age. I am 34 years old, and even though I don't feel 34 and I am very healthy, minus maybe some chub in some other areas, like some little fat chubby stuff. My age was something to take into consideration because, unfortunately, in the world of pregnancy, I am considered a geriatric pregnant person. Even though I did not have a high-risk pregnancy, I actually had an amazing pregnancy. I had no symptoms. I had no problems, no complications, anything leading up to my labor. So those are the 3 reasons that we had an induction. And the induction wasn't early. It was actually 39 weeks and 4 days when we went in for our induction, so it wasn't too terribly early. So on Sunday, we called at 5 o'clock to get our arrival time to the hospital, and we were told that they were super busy, that they had a lot of people there who were in active labor on their own, and that we were 4th in line on the induction schedule to come in. So we were to eat dinner and wait until they called. So we waited around for a while. I think it was about 9 o'clock at night. And I finally told my husband, I'm going to bed. So I decided to go to bed. We got the phone call at midnight that we could go ahead and come on in. And so by the time we got dressed, got in the car, and actually got to the hospital, it was 2 a.m. on what would have been Monday morning, the 26th. And we got there about 2. They admitted us, and the party really got started about 3 o'clock in the morning. And they started with a drug called Cerbidil that they put up inside. By the way, this is going to get TMI, so if you don't want to hear TMI, then you just need to leave the video now, because I'm going to give you all the details. They put Cerbidil up inside of my girl part. And what that medication was supposed to do was start softening the cervix and seeing if we can get the labor process started that way. They gave me my first dose at 3. They gave me my second dose at 6. By 9 o'clock in the morning, I was still only 1 centimeter dilated, and I was 90% effaced. So we hadn't made much progress with the Cerbidil. They basically gave you the medicine and then you went to sleep. So we went to sleep as well as you could sleep in a hospital. So by 9, somewhere between 9 and 9:30 in the morning, they went ahead and started Pitocin. They did the Pitocin. They started me out at a 4 of Pitocin. And at that point, we were just hanging out, letting the Pitocin do its job. And the doctor popped in around noon to see how we were progressing. I think around noon, we were like a 2. And so they bumped up the Pitocin to a 6. And we stayed at a 6 for quite some time. We went ahead and entered the afternoon hours of Monday, just kind of progressing through the labor normally, and everything was fine. I was up walking. I was trying my hardest to do this labor naturally. And so we were walking. I was bouncing on balls. I was swaying. We had made great progress and, just doing the labor thing. It was going well. Hubby took a nap in between, and we were just moving through the process. It wasn't until probably about 7 o'clock that night. No, it was probably about 5 something. Excuse the dogs, they're playing. Hold, please. Okay, sorry about that. So, probably somewhere around, 5:30, 6 o'clock, we had finally progressed to about a 6. And also somewhere around there, apparently I started getting what is called back labor. I was talking to the nurse and I was like, I have no clue what's going on, but I am dying. Like, this is worse than, like, I could handle the contractions. I was breathing through them. I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. But, oh my God, you guys, this thing called back labor, like, I don't even know how to describe the pain to you. I mean, I was literally in tears from the back labor. So at probably about 7 o'clock that night, I threw in the towel. And I was like, I'm done. I can't do it. I told Josh, I said, I tried to do it naturally, but I can't. I cannot do it. Like, this is unlike anything I've ever experienced in my life. So I finally threw in the towel and got an epidural. And she came in and she did that. Gave me the epidural. Everything went fine with that. And at that point, I was bedridden, as you know. And laboring was easy after that, to tell you the honest truth. But we had only dilated to like a 6, maybe a 7, by this point in the night. So, about 8 o'clock at night is when it started to get, about 8 or 9. Probably about 8. Between 8 and 9 is when it really started to get interesting. I was obviously laying in the bed and all that great stuff. So, they have the monitor strapped up to you, and at this point is when Barrett just started not responding well. His heart rate just kept dropping, and it would drop, and then it would come back up, and then it would drop, and then it would come back up. And so they kept coming in, and they're like, okay, you need to move positions. So they would move me on my right side. They would move me over to my left side, and then he would come back and be fine, and he would be good for like 10 or 15 minutes. And then he would just completely, heart rate would drop. So they would come back in, roll. I'd have to roll to the other side. Then they would come back in and I have to roll to the other side. I would have to go to my back. I was in between the right side, the left side, and my back for like 4 hours. And going through that whole process. Anyway, so the doctor called, and it was utterly annoying. It was frustrating. It was terrifying, to tell you the honest truth, because his heart rate kept dropping, and we would move positions, and then he would be fine for like 10 minutes, and then it would just drop again. And no one on the nurses' staff seemed to really be that concerned. They kept having me try these different positions to get me to keep dilating and to move on. And, at one point I just said, has anyone called the doctor yet? Like, I respect you guys and I respect your position, but has anyone informed my doctor about what is going on here? Like, how long are we going to sit here and, Tally, no. how long are we going to sit here and flip back and forth side to side? And I told them this, in pretty much this tone, very annoyed, very frustrated. I just told them, I said, how long are we going to sit here and flip back and forth before we finally just say something's wrong? So I was very frustrated. It was one of those things where it was like, call my doctor, like, let him know what's happening, what's going on, and let's figure out what we need to do here. So I think they called him somewhere around 10:30, and he called into the room, and we talked. And so I just told him, I said, listen, something's not right. You're looking at it from the house. We've been doing this dance and song for like the last 4 or 5 hours. He's not getting any better. People are talking about cords potentially being wrapped around necks. And, I forgot to tell you that they had come in and they had put fluid back in my uterus. So they had broke my water to get everything started. And then they had come back in somewhere in this whole process of him stressing out. And they put fluid back up in my uterus to help take the stress off of him. Well, they also took my Pitocin and dropped it down from a 6 to a 2 because they wanted him to not be under stress. And just so you know, they normally have people progress all the way up to like a 14 on Pitocin to get the laboring process going and to get people dilated. So they had dropped my Pitocin all the way down to a 2. They had put fluid back up in my uterus to help him not be in distress. And so that was the point. All that happened before I lost my cool and told them to call my doctor. Because I'm like, why are we doing all of this stuff? Like, to me, it seemed really serious. Like, why? So, finally the doctor called and we talked. And he said, hold please. He said, well, do you want to do a C-section? He's like, if you want to do it, we'll do it. Then I'm like, well, do we need a C-section? Because my preference is no. I don't want a C-section. But if it's needed because he's in distress, then yeah, let's do it. And so he goes, well, he keeps bouncing back. So I think we're okay. He's like, give it till midnight. Let's see what happens at midnight. If you're still not dilated past what you are right now, because I hadn't really progressed in a while, if you're still not dilated and he's still struggling, then we'll call it. We'll just call it a day. And I was like, okay, so that's our plan. So we proceeded to move through this. The back laboring picked up again, and it was horrible. So she came in, and she put like a shot in my portal hole of my epidural. And I don't know what she did or what she put in there, but holy crap. I could not feel my legs. Like, I freaked out. They were so heavy. They were so huge. I literally felt like I was paralyzed from the waist down, and I freaked out. At one point, my leg like fell off the bed, and I didn't even know it fell off the bed. Like, it was horrible. So I like had the nurse get the anesthesiologist back in there, and I was like, you have got to like shut this down. Like, I cannot handle it. I was freaked. And I couldn't even lift my own legs or move them or anything. So if I had gone into labor at that point, like, people would have to, my legs would just be like dead weight. So anyway, she bumped my epidural down so that I could start getting some feeling back. And it took a good probably 45 minutes or more for me to even get to the point where I could like wiggle my toes. It was ridiculous. Finally, I was fine, and we just left it at whatever that level was, and it was all good. But midnight rolled around, and the nurse came in, did a cervical check, and I had dilated all the way to a 9, and then the doctor had finally called at midnight, and he was still up and down with his heart rate and up and down with everything, but he was more stable at that point than he had been for the beginning of the evening. And so my doctor said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'm dilated to a 9. I said, we'll just we'll just do it. I can get to a 10 and let's just get him out. I was like, we just have to get him out. Because I did not want a C-section. I know they're not horrible. You know, I didn't want one. And so, you know, without there being a reason to have one. So, finally about, what time was it? 1 o'clock in the morning. The nurse came in and checked and she's like, you're a 10. She's like, you're good. You're a 10. He looks good. She's like, do you want to start, you know, the pushing process and see how it goes? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we started the pushing process and we pushed for 2 hours before we had to call the doctor to get the doctor to come and do his part. And it got to the point where the Pitocin was still at a 2 and my contractions were pretty far apart still, which it does not make for a good labor because you need your contractions to be close so that you can push him down and get him out. Well, my contractions were too far apart, which was causing him to be able to come back up. However, she didn't want to turn the Pitocin back up because she didn't want to stress him out. So it wasn't until about an hour and a half into pushing, she decided she was going to bump the Pitocin up. So she bumped it up to a 4 to get the contractions closer together. And that ended up helping a little bit to keep him down instead of coming back up. So anyhow, we finally get to the point where the head's there, it's good, we can call the doctor. So she goes ahead and calls the doctor, calls all the nurses in from the NICU to come in and do their part. And doctor gets there and then we pushed for a little bit. I think once the doctor got there, we pushed like maybe 3 or 4 times and then he was coming out. And anyways, he came out. So sure enough, he came out and the doctor goes, the cord's wrapped around his neck. And so he's holding him up and he pulls the cord away from his neck. So it was, in fact, the whole entire time that he was in distress during labor. And the reason we kept tossing and turning was because, in fact, the cord was around his neck. And that is one of the prime reasons right there why we did not go full term, because he may not have made it if we had gone full term or gone naturally by ourselves. The other thing is, so he comes out, he's perfectly fine, he's breathing, he's crying, he looks good. They take him over to clean him off, they put him on my chest for a while and he stays there. We let the umbilical cord stop pulsating and leave it there for like a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And then they're ready to take him over. We talked about not cleaning him off, so they didn't clean him off completely of all of his stuff. So he and my husband went over to start getting checked out by the NICU nurses. And he did have a little oxygen that he was having to look at for a little bit, to be expected because the cord was wrapped around his neck. And they didn't have to hook him up to oxygen, but they were worried and concerned about it. So they stood over there and kind of worked through all that stuff, my husband and them did. And the doctor is over there with me doing all of the post stuff. And so he actually starts, the kneading on the stomach part, getting the uterus out. At some point, homeboy is like full-fledged all the way up inside of me. And I was like, what the heck? I was like, what is that? And he was like, oh, I'm just getting it all out. And I was like, nobody told me that was going to happen. So anyways, that was funny. But anyways, he pulled out and I'm going to start crying probably. So I'm going to lose it. You guys, these postpartum hormones are awful. I am not a crier. I do not cry. You can ask anyone. I don't cry. It's just not, I don't know. I don't cry. I'm not a crier. I'm more like an analytical problem solver. I just don't cry. So this is killing me this week. Hold. Okay. Let me first give you a backstory on my doctor. I interviewed doctors to see who I wanted. landed on this guy, Dr. Horsley. And he was amazing throughout my entire pregnancy. Just phenomenal with whatever I wanted, whatever I asked for. He was so great with and thoughtful with all of the previous pregnancies that I'd had. And so every time I asked him for an ultrasound every 2 weeks for my first trimester, just for peace of mind. And he did it every time, and he did them. He didn't send me over. I didn't see the ultrasound tech in his office until like the end, until I went every single week. Prior to that, the doctor did all of my ultrasounds, and he was amazing throughout my pregnancy. So for him to look up and say this to me when it was just like, oh, it was horrible. So I'm just going to warn you, I'm going to cry for the remainder of this video. So when he pulled out the placenta, he pulled it out and he was looking at it, and he just kept looking at it and looking at it. And I was like, what's wrong? You know, like, why are you studying that so closely? Like, what is that? And, quit, Tess. And, he's holding the placenta and the rest of the cord in his hand, and he looks up at me and he says, Andrea, this truly is a miracle baby. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, look at this placenta and look at the cord. And he goes, normal placenta is here, and the cords come out in the center on the top, or they're normally really centered on the top or in the middle of a placenta. And he goes, the baby's cord was attached to the edge of the placenta and actually also hanging on to the sac. And so it was kind of it wasn't fully attached to the placenta. It was about, he said probably 75% attached to the placenta. And then the other half was just like attached to like his little sac and stuff. And he was like, that's what this is. And he like held it out. And I was like, okay, well, what does that mean? And he was like, okay, so here's what that means. He was like, watch. And he goes, the umbilical cord is not as thick as it should have been. And he goes, watch. And he literally just pulled it real easy, just pulled it, and it broke. And he's like, because it wasn't attached properly, it didn't form properly, and it was too thin. And he goes, it would have just taken the baby to do one ginormous move, and he would have ripped his umbilical cord, and he would have been born still. And he was like, this child seriously is nothing short of a miracle. He was like, there's no reason why he shouldn't have ripped this cord within the last 9 months. With all of the movement that he had with him flipping over to go head down, he was like, there's no reason why this should have stayed attached. He was like, medically, it shouldn't have stayed attached. And I lost it. I'm over there like bawling my eyes out. Josh is like, what are y'all talking about? Why is she crying? And then Dr. Horsley told her, and it was just one of those things where it was like, it was horrible because it was like all of the stress that was coming off of him when he was, in the last hours of the heart going down. And then for the last 9 months, it was truly, God had his hands all over it. So I don't know what we would have done, honestly, if it wouldn't have worked out. And that, if science would have happened the way that science was supposed to happen, I don't know what would have, I don't know how life would have resumed at that point, but I don't know. We're not going to think about that because we have a child here, but it's crazy to think that, you have this perfect pregnancy, with no complications whatsoever. And then when you actually have the child, you find out that there was a major complication in the forming of everything, and that, it could have all been over by just a humongous, just a huge movement in there. It could have all been over. So, it was crazy. The last hours of pregnancy were emotional. They were crazy. I was frustrated. And then to hear the doctor say that, it was wild. And there's a name for it. I completely forgot the name for it, but there's a name for it on how it formed, and all of that great stuff. But anyways, he was here at 4:22 in the morning, and hold on. And then we were off and running with a baby. So thankfully he checked out and passed everything, and we were gone within 12 hours because we were ready to be home. We were ready. So that's his little story, his little miracle baby story, you could say. That's the doctor's words, not mine. So, for all intents and purposes, if you look at science, according to Dr. Horsley, he shouldn't be here. So, that's how you know that there's someone greater than us out there that had his hand in this whole entire thing. So, he's here. And that is his story. It's not really that traumatic of a birth story. It's pretty normal, I think. I was just frustrated towards the end of my labor because we kept playing this game of back and forth. And it was just one of those things where it was like, if you guys think there's a problem, then why are we even hesitating? What is the hesitation here? If he can't get stable and he's at risk, and, why are we playing this game? I was just so frustrated. But everything worked out. He came out great. I did great. I only tore in one little spot, and I was up and walking that same day. I feel great. I feel fine. Yeah. So that's his little story. That's our little miracle baby. And I am so thankful that he's here and that nothing happened to him in the uterus without umbilical cord. So, and or that nothing happened in the womb with the placenta and the umbilical cord area where it was attached. So, anyways, it was interesting.